Hello and welcome to Journey Through Time, the place where history and the story of our planet unfold in a calm and captivating way. Tonight, we will step back, not just years or centuries, but hundreds of millions of years, to a world that looked nothing like the one you see outside your window today. This is the story of the Triassic, the dawn of the dinosaurs, a time when Earth was reshaping itself after its greatest disaster and quietly laying the foundations for the empire of reptiles. Imagine a planet still scarred by the most devastating extinction in its history, yet already stirring with strange new life that would set the stage for creatures destined to rule land, sea, and sky. 60 million years earlier, at the very end of the Permian, Earth endured what scientists call the Great Dying. Vast volcanic eruptions filled the skies with ash and the oceans with poison, erasing more than 90% of species. Forests turned to ash, coral reefs collapsed, and once dominant creatures like trilobites vanished forever. The Earth must have felt empty, stripped back to its bare bones. And yet, in that silence, life began again. The Triassic was a period of recovery, of strange experiments in survival. On land, small, quick reptiles scurried across barren plains. In rivers, giant salamander-like amphibians lurked. In the seas, new predators like ichthyosaurs and nothosaurs tested their chances. It was not the familiar earth of whales, flowering plants, or birds. It was raw, alien, and full of possibility. Stretching across nearly the entire globe was a single landmass, Pangaea, the supercontinent. Its vast interior baked under searing summers and froze in brutal winters, far from any moderating ocean. Deserts of red sand stretched endlessly, while along coasts, seasonal rains brought bursts of life. To stand in the heart of Pangaea would have been to face a horizon of emptiness, a reminder of both catastrophe and rebirth. It was in this stark environment that the earliest dinosaurs appeared, not yet the towering giants of later ages, but small, light, and unassuming. They darted through shadows, competing with crocodile relatives and armored reptiles for survival. No one looking at them then could have guessed that they would one day inherit the Earth. The Triassic world was both fragile and extraordinary, a place caught between devastation and renewal. After the Great Dying, ecosystems were unstable, yet life pushed forward, inventing itself in strange new ways. On land, amphibians that had once dominated swamps now lingered only in scattered rivers and lakes, their reign broken. Reptiles, however, began to spread into every niche. Their scales protected them from drying out, their eggs could survive away from water, and their bodies tolerated extremes that others could not. This gave them a decisive edge in the harsh climates of Pangaea. Some reptiles grew heavy armor, bony plates and spikes along their backs, making them slow but well-defended grazers. Others developed long legs, shifting their posture so that their limbs stood beneath their bodies rather than sprawled to the sides. This innovation, subtle as it seems, allowed them to walk and run with endurance. It was the first step toward the upright stance that would one day define the dinosaurs. Still, in the early Triassic, dinosaurs were not the lords of the Earth. Instead, they were overshadowed by the crocodile relatives, called crurotaurs. These came in staggering variety. Some were swift, two-legged hunters. Others were bulky, armored herbivores. Still others stalked rivers with powerful jaws. If you were betting on which lineage would dominate the planet, you would likely have chosen the crocodile kin, not the tiny dinosaurs scurrying at their feet. The environment was as much a test as the competition. The interior of Pangaea was a land of extremes, scorching summers, freezing winters, violent storms, and long droughts. Waterholes became battlefields, where desperate animals gathered in uneasy truces until the last muddy drops were gone. Dust storms swept across the deserts, carving the land into red dunes. And yet, life endured. Hardy conifers with needle-shaped leaves grew where little else could. Ferns spread in carpets wherever moisture lingered. Ginkgo-like trees unfurled their fan-shaped leaves, strange and ancient, yet resilient. Insects, the great survivors, played their role in stitching the ecosystems back together. Beetles chewed wood, recycling nutrients into the soil. Dragonflies with wide wingspans darted across rivers. Primitive flies buzzed over ferns, while spiders spun webs in the shadows of cycads. Without bees or butterflies, pollination relied on wind and the simplest insect interactions. Yet the system worked well enough to sustain new forests. Meanwhile, in the seas, the world was being reinvented in equally dramatic fashion. Coral reefs had collapsed during the Permian extinction, but in the Triassic, they slowly returned, built by new generations of tiny creatures. Marine reptiles began their conquest of the oceans. The ichthyosaurs, long-snouted predators with sleek dolphin-like bodies, raced after schools of fish. Nothosaurs, with limbs half-turned to flippers, prowled coastal shallows, snapping at prey with sharp teeth. Even stranger creatures appeared, placodonts with broad, crushing teeth that fed on shellfish, resembling armored sea cows. Each was a new experiment in survival, testing the possibilities of evolution in waters once emptied of life. The seas were not silent anymore. Schools of ammonites, spiraled relatives of squid and octopuses, floated in huge numbers, spinning in graceful coils. Belemnites, with their straight shells, joined them. Sharks and bony fish diversified, darting in silver flashes through the waves. Rays glided across sandy bottoms. Predators and prey balanced each other in an endless struggle, teeth against shell, speed against speed. Yet life remained precarious. Volcanoes continued to erupt along the rift zones of Pangaea, pouring lava and gases into the atmosphere. Ash darkened skies, and carbon dioxide heated the climate further. Rivers flooded and then dried, forcing migrations. Entire groups of animals thrived for a while, only to vanish when the climate shifted again. Evolution in the Triassic was not steady progress. It was improvisation, constant adaptation, survival against relentless change. And amidst this flux, the dinosaurs waited. Small, lightly built, often overshadowed, they were not yet the giants of popular imagination. They were opportunists, quietly spreading, testing their endurance, honing traits that would one day transform them into rulers. Upright posture, efficient lungs, possibly even higher metabolisms than their rivals. These qualities did not make them dominant in the Triassic, but they gave them the resilience to endure what others could not. The Triassic was an age of experimentation. Some reptiles grew tusks, others carried strange head crests. Some walked like tanks, others sprinted like deer. Mammal-like creatures, small and furred, scurried in the shadows, nibbling insects and hiding from predators. Pterosaurs, the first flying reptiles, appeared with wings of stretched skin, gliding across rivers in search of fish. It was a world filled with prototypes, many doomed to vanish, but some destined to shape the future. In this fragile age, every step, every adaptation mattered. The Triassic was not yet the age of dinosaurs. It was the rehearsal, the testing ground. But in its deserts, coasts, and forests, the blueprints of the future were being written. To step into the Triassic world would be to walk through landscapes both alien and familiar. At the coasts of Pangaea, where seasonal rains watered the land, you would find conifer forests standing like sentinels. Their stiff needles and tall trunks swayed in dry winds, carrying the scent of salt from distant seas. Beneath them, carpets of ferns spread across damp soil, while cycads, with thick trunks and crowns of fronds, grew in clusters. Here, life was richest. Insects buzzed, amphibians croaked, reptiles hunted among shadows. Rivers, fed by erratic rains, poured into deltas where fish swam and predators lurked. Travel inland, however, and the picture changed dramatically. The heart of Pangaea was so far from the sea that moisture rarely reached it. There, deserts of red sand stretched endlessly beneath scorching sun. Heat shimmered across rocky plains, while hardy conifers twisted against the elements. Ferns grew only in rare patches near seasonal springs. Waterholes became the lifeline of every creature, centers of competition and conflict. When rains finally came, rivers swelled and valleys blossomed briefly with greenery, only to wither again in merciless drought. Survival in the interior was a constant test of endurance. It was in these contrasting worlds, lush green shores and barren red deserts, that evolution pushed creatures in different directions. On the coasts, animals could rely on more stable resources. Inland, only the most resilient survived. Small reptiles darted quickly across the sand, their survival depending on speed and stamina. Herbivores evolved powerful jaws to shear through tough plants like cycads and conifers, while carnivores sharpened their teeth and claws to hunt them. Some reptiles grew armor, heavy plates embedded in their skin, turning their bodies into walking fortresses. Others relied on speed, sprinting across plains with long strides, using agility rather than protection. Dinosaurs were among these experiments, though in the Triassic, they were far from dominant. Small and nimble, they lived in the shadows of larger rivals. Species like Eoraptor, scarcely larger than a dog, were omnivores, nibbling plants and chasing insects. Herrerasaurus, more formidable, stretched nearly 3 meters in length, with curved claws and sharp teeth for hunting. Quilophysis, slender and long-necked, ran in groups across floodplains, perhaps coordinating hunts. They were not giants yet, but they carried blueprints that would one day create titans like Brachiosaurus and fierce predators like Tyrannosaurus. What gave dinosaurs their quiet advantage were subtle but powerful traits. Their legs were placed directly under their bodies, unlike the sprawling stance of most reptiles. This posture meant they could move more efficiently, covering ground without tiring as quickly. Fossil evidence suggests their lungs may have been more advanced than their rivals, with air sacs that allowed for continuous airflow, similar to modern birds. This gave them endurance in hot, thin Triassic air, where oxygen levels were lower than today. In a world of extremes, endurance was survival. Still, the Triassic was not theirs alone. The crocodile relatives, crurotaurs, came in astonishing variety. Some galloped across land on 2 legs, hunting with agility. Others, heavily armored, browsed on plants like living tanks. Semi-aquatic forms lurked in rivers, snapping at prey with crocodile-like jaws. For tens of millions of years, they seemed poised to dominate. In truth, if fate had taken a slightly different turn, the age of reptiles might have been ruled by crocodile kin, not dinosaurs. Above this drama, the skies themselves were changing. The first pterosaurs, flying reptiles, appeared. Small at first, with wingspans of barely a meter, they glided across rivers in search of fish and insects. Their fragile skeletons, light and hollow, made them pioneers of flight long before birds existed. They were clumsy on land but masters of the air, opening a new dimension in Triassic ecosystems. Their descendants would grow into giants. But here, they were experiments in aerial life, testing what it meant to claim the skies. Meanwhile, in the seas, the story was equally dramatic. Imagine standing on a Triassic shoreline. Warm waves rolled in, reflecting the burning sun. Suddenly, a sleek ichthyosaur burst from the surface, its long body arcing before splashing back down. Nearby, a nothosaur raised its serpent-like neck, jaws snapping at fish. Beneath the surface, schools of ammonites drifted in spiraled shells, while sharks and bony fish darted through the currents. The seas, once emptied by the great dying, were alive again, thrumming with movement and sound. Life in the Triassic was a constant struggle, but also a constant rebirth. Each species was an experiment. Some lineages thrived for a while, only to vanish when climate shifted or volcanoes erupted. Others endured quietly, carrying traits that would shape the future. Mammal-like creatures, no bigger than mice, skittered in burrows, feeding on insects. They were insignificant compared to the reptiles, yet they carried within them the seeds of warm-blooded life. Their differentiated teeth, possible fur, and higher metabolisms hinted at the destiny of mammals. They survived not through strength, but through stealth, resilience, and adaptability. The Triassic world was quieter than later ages. There were no birdsongs yet, no flowering meadows. Instead, the air carried the buzz of insects, the croak of amphibians, and the rustle of reptiles moving through ferns. It was a world caught in recovery, fragile yet determined. Every sound, every footprint pressed into mud, every fossil we now uncover, tells us the same story. Even after Earth's greatest disaster, life refused to surrender. In many ways, the Triassic was a second beginning, a stage-setting act in the great play of Earth's history. It was here, in silence after catastrophe, that resilience was tested and the foundations of the Mesozoic were laid. Dinosaurs were not yet rulers, but they were waiting in the wings. Reptiles of every shape and size filled the land, seas, and skies. Amphibians held on where they could. Mammal ancestors quietly endured. And through it all, the Earth reshaped itself, preparing for the empires yet to come. If you had stood in the forests of the Triassic, the impression would have been both awe-inspiring and unsettling. These were not the familiar woodlands of our time. There were no oaks, no maples, no flowering plants at all. Instead, towering conifers reached skyward with needle-like leaves, while cycads, stout and crowned with leathery fronds, clustered in groves. Ginkgo-like trees, with their odd fan-shaped leaves, spread where the soil allowed, a lineage so ancient that their descendants still survive today. On the forest floor, ferns spread like green carpets, filling every patch of dampness with life. It was a world before blossoms, before bees, before the hum of pollination as we know it. Yet, it was alive, vibrant, and resilient. The diversity of animals that inhabited these forests revealed a planet in recovery. Large herbivorous reptiles browsed on conifers and cycads, dragging heavy armored bodies through the undergrowth. Some, like the etosaurs, were covered in bony plates, their broad snouts adapted for rooting in vegetation. Others, like early sauropodomorphs, such as Plateosaurus, reached lengths of up to 9 meters. With long necks and powerful bodies, they could reach foliage that smaller animals could not. These giants were some of the earliest representatives of the dinosaur lineage to truly stand out from their reptilian neighbors. Yet alongside giants, tiny survivors thrived. In the shadows of cycads scurried small mammal-like creatures, no larger than rats, with differentiated teeth and perhaps whiskers or fur. They emerged at night to avoid predators, feeding on insects and burrowing into soil for safety. These creatures were insignificant in size, but their evolutionary strategy was profound. Warm blood, fur for insulation, and parental care. Though they did not dominate the Triassic, they laid the groundwork for the mammalian lineage that would eventually outlast the dinosaurs themselves. Predators, of course, were never absent. Slender hunters like Chelophysis moved in groups, swift and coordinated, using their claws and sharp teeth to bring down prey. Imagine the eerie silence of a Triassic evening, suddenly broken by the rustle of these pack hunters slipping through ferns, their long tails balancing as they darted forward. Crocodile relatives, meanwhile, competed fiercely, some heavily armored and slow, others agile and bipedal, their jaws designed to crush bone or slice flesh. For millions of years, these creatures rivaled dinosaurs for dominance, filling nearly every role in the food chain. Above, the skies carried the first fragile pioneers of flight. The earliest pterosaurs, though small, opened a new dimension of life. Their wings of stretched skin caught the wind as they glided across rivers, swooping to snatch fish. Clumsy on land, but graceful in the air, they revealed the first steps toward aerial ecosystems. Though tiny compared to their later cousins, who would span wings as wide as airplanes, these creatures added another voice to the chorus of the Triassic world. The oceans, too, pulsed with innovation. The ichthyosaurs had by now become sleek, fast swimmers, chasing fish with dolphin-like grace. Fossil evidence even preserves their last meals. Fish bones and squid remain sealed inside their stone-turned stomachs. Nothosaurs, long-necked and slender, prowled lagoons, while plastodonts with crushing teeth grazed on shellfish along shallow coasts. Ammonites swirled in massive schools, their coiled shells glinting beneath the waves, while sharks, ever survivors, reappeared in new forms, scattering their teeth across the seafloor as eternal fossils. It was not only predators that filled the seas. Coral reefs began to rebuild, though fragile and patchy compared to their former glory. Rays skimmed sandy bottoms, bony fish darted in flashes of silver, and belemnites drifted with jet-propelled bursts. Every rung of the food ladder was slowly restored, from algae blooming in sunlit shallows to apex hunters like ichthyosaurs reigning in the depths. The oceans, once silent after the Great Dying, had become theaters of constant movement, of life reborn through struggle. And yet, the Triassic world was always balanced on a knife's edge. Volcanoes still rumbled across Pangaea, spewing ash and gases into the skies. Climate fluctuated wildly, monsoons drenching coasts one year only, for droughts to follow the next. Oxygen levels were lower than today, making every breath a challenge for large animals. Entire lineages thrived for a time, only to vanish abruptly when environments shifted. The story of the Triassic was not steady progress. It was a cycle of experiments, failures, and rare successes. Among those quiet successes were the first true dinosaurs. Though small, their endurance set them apart. They could cover long distances in search of food and water. Their efficient breathing allowed them to function in low-oxygen climates. Their lightweight bones made them agile, able to escape larger predators. Some lived in groups, perhaps cooperating in hunts or protecting their young. Others were solitary, slipping through undergrowth unnoticed. In every case, they were survivors, creatures built not for dominance yet, but for persistence. Equally important were the unseen rhythms of daily life. Insects stitched ecosystems together, recycling nutrients, pollinating plants, and feeding countless predators. Amphibians clung to rivers and lakes, their croaks filling the air at dusk. Seasonal rains transformed dry valleys into wetlands teeming with life, only to dry again, leaving behind silence and desolation. These cycles shaped behavior, migration, and survival strategies. To live in the Triassic was to adapt constantly, to endure not just predators, but the pulse of climate itself. And in this crucible of survival, the seeds of future empires were planted. Mammals, tiny and furtive, carried warm blood and fur into the night. Dinosaurs, light and efficient, tested body plans that would one day produce giants. Pterosaurs stretched skin into wings and conquered the air. Marine reptiles filled oceans with teeth and grace. The Triassic was not yet the age of dominance, but it was the dawn of possibility, the rehearsal before the thunder of the Jurassic. The Triassic world can best be understood as a vast experiment. Every surviving lineage from the Permian extinction was adapting, mutating, and reshaping itself under pressure from a harsh environment. The Great Dying had cleared the stage, erasing over 90% of Earth's species, but it had also created opportunity. Empty niches begged to be filled, and evolution responded with an astonishing variety of forms. The reptiles, above all, thrived. Their scaly skin prevented water loss, their eggs could be laid on dry land, and their metabolisms endured scarcity. These traits made them far more adaptable than amphibians, who still relied on moist environments. As a result, reptiles radiated outward, filling deserts, forests, rivers, and coasts with new designs. Some reptiles carried heavy shields of bone across their backs, slow but nearly invulnerable to attack. Others developed tall limbs and upright postures, allowing them to travel long distances across open plains. Crocodile relatives, the crurotaurs, became astonishingly diverse. Slender two-legged sprinters, bulky armored grazers, and semi-aquatic ambush predators, all descended from the same lineage. At times, it seemed inevitable that they, not dinosaurs, would inherit the Earth. Dinosaurs, meanwhile, remained small and relatively obscure, yet their subtle advantages were crucial. Upright limbs gave them stamina. Lightweight skeletons made them agile. Advanced lungs may have allowed them to move longer in low-oxygen environments. While they did not dominate in sheer numbers, they endured. And endurance, in a world so unstable, was often the difference between survival and extinction. Mammal-like creatures also survived, though in the shadows. Known as synapsids, these tiny insectivores carried traits that pointed toward the future: differentiated teeth, possible whiskers, and warm blood. Their bones reveal fast, continuous growth, unlike most reptiles, which hints at elevated metabolisms. Some even show impressions, suggesting fur, an adaptation for retaining heat. These humble survivors lived quietly, but their persistence through the Triassic ensured that the mammalian line would never be broken. The forests of the Triassic were alien, yet familiar. Imagine walking among towering conifers, their stiff needles whispering in dry winds. Cycads stood in clusters, their thick trunks topped with crowns of fronds. Ginkgo-like trees added their strange fan-shaped leaves to the canopy. On the ground, ferns spread in thick mats, while horsetails grew tall near rivers. The air was heavy with the buzz of insects, beetles gnawing at wood, dragonflies patrolling streams, primitive flies swarming in clouds. Spiders spun webs among the cycads, while millipedes recycled fallen leaves. Herbivores moved through these forests in every size. Small reptilian grazers nibbled at ferns, armored etosaurs rooted in low plants, and early sauropodomorphs, like Plateosaurus, stretched upward to strip conifer branches. Their presence transformed the landscape. Plants were grazed, soils churned by heavy feet, Trails cut through undergrowth. In turn, predators followed. Slender dinosaurs like Chelophysis darted in packs, their claws and teeth designed for speed and slicing. Crocodile kin stalked silently in rivers or ambushed prey from shadows. The forests were alive with tension, every rustle of fern or snap of twig carrying the possibility of pursuit. The deserts of the interior presented a different scene. Red sands stretched beneath relentless sun, broken only by hardy conifers and scrappy ferns near springs. Waterholes became arenas of desperation, where predators and prey alike gathered under uneasy truces. Winds whipped dust across the horizon, carving dunes into shifting shapes. Here, only the most resilient species could endure. Small reptiles darting quickly across open ground, insectivores digging into burrows, carnivores chasing prey in bursts of speed. Herbivores grew massive stomachs to ferment tough conifer leaves, extracting every bit of energy from a meager diet. Above all this, the skies had begun to awaken. The earliest pterosaurs were fragile pioneers of flight, their membranous wings stretched across elongated fingers. Their hollow bones made them light enough to glide, though fragile against predators. At first small, with wingspans scarcely longer than a human's arm, they darted after insects or skimmed rivers for fish. Though they were new and vulnerable, they represented a revolutionary adaptation, the conquest of the skies. The seas of the Triassic were no less remarkable. After the devastation of the Great Dying, marine ecosystems rebuilt themselves. Coral reefs returned in patches, forming havens for new species. Ammonites, coiled relatives of squid, floated in vast schools. Belemnites, with their straight shells, darted with jet propulsion. Sharks reappeared in diverse forms, leaving behind countless fossilized teeth. Rays skimmed sandy bottoms, while bony fish flashed in silver shoals. But it was the marine reptiles that captured dominance. The ichthyosaurs, with bodies like streamlined dolphins and eyes adapted for deep-water vision, became apex hunters. Some species were no longer than a human, while others grew to lengths of 15 meters. Fossils reveal their stomach contents: fish bones, squid beaks, entire meals frozen in time. Nothosaurs, with their flexible necks and semi-aquatic bodies, prowled lagoons, able to move both on land and in shallow water. Placodonts crushed shellfish with broad, blunt teeth, resembling armored sea cows. Each of these creatures was a new invention, evolution's response to empty seas. The Triassic was not just an age of recovery, it was an age of fragile balance. Every ecosystem, whether desert, forest, or ocean, could collapse at any moment under climate shifts or volcanic eruptions. Entire lineages rose to prominence, only to vanish within a few million years. Yet in that constant turnover, resilience was forged. Dinosaurs, synapsids, insects, and marine reptiles honed traits that allowed them to withstand chaos. The atmosphere itself shaped survival. Oxygen levels were lower than today, forcing creatures to adapt. Dinosaurs with efficient lungs could sustain activity longer than rivals. Warm-blooded synapsids, though small, could forage during cooler nights when others slowed. Even plants reflected these conditions. Conifers conserved water. Cycads stored nutrients. Ginkgos thrived in poor soils. Every leaf, every breath, every adaptation was a response to a planet still healing. And through it all, silence lingered. True birds had not yet evolved, so no songs filled the canopy. Flowers and grasses did not yet exist, so no meadows rippled in color. The sounds of the Triassic were the hiss of reptiles moving through dry ferns, the croak of amphibians clinging to rivers, the buzz of insects, and the crash of armored bodies through conifers. It was quieter than later ages, but in that quiet, the foundations of the future were being laid. The Triassic, more than any other period, reminds us that greatness often begins in obscurity. The small, the overlooked, the fragile. These were the creatures that carried the seeds of empires. The mammals, scurrying in shadows. The dinosaurs darting between ferns. The pterosaurs, gliding uncertainly above rivers. None of them ruled yet, but all of them endured, and in endurance lay destiny. To imagine the Triassic is to imagine a planet scarred by catastrophe, but stubbornly alive. The Great Dying had left Earth stripped of complexity, yet evolution wasted no time in rebuilding. Insects stitched ecosystems together, plants reoccupied barren soil, reptiles spread in every direction, and mammals survived in shadows. Every sound of that world, the hiss of wind over deserts, the croak of amphibians, the beat of primitive wings, spoke of recovery, resilience, and fragile new beginnings. The forests of Pangaea pulsed with contrasts. Conifers stood tall, their needles adapted to arid climates. Cycads grew in clusters like alien palms. Ginkgos, strange and enduring, spread their fan-shaped leaves in scattered groves. Ferns carpeted the forest floor, while horsetails rose like green reeds near streams. Without flowers, pollination depended on wind or simple insect activity. Without grasses, herbivores fed on tough conifer leaves and cycads. This forced constant adaptation. Teeth grew sharper, digestive systems larger, jaws stronger. Every mouthful was a test of survival. The herbivores of this world were diverse. Armored etosaurs shuffled slowly, their bodies covered in bony plates, their snouts digging for roots and vegetation. Early sauropodomorphs like Plateosaurus stretched their necks high, stripping needles from conifers. Some stood on two legs, others dropped onto all fours to graze, experimenting with body plans that would later define giant dinosaurs. Herds left trackways across floodplains, their overlapping prints frozen in mud for millions of years. Each footprint is a reminder that even in a fragile ecosystem, giants were learning how to be giants. Predators shadowed every herbivore. Slender dinosaurs like Calophysis darted in coordinated groups, their long tails balancing their bodies as they closed in on prey. Herrerasaurus, larger and more formidable, hunted with slicing claws and sharp teeth, among the first true carnivorous dinosaurs. Crocodile relatives rivaled them at every turn. Some sprinted on two legs, jaws snapping with deadly precision. Others lurked in rivers, ambushing anything that strayed too close. For much of the Triassic, these crocodile kin were more numerous, more varied, and seemingly more successful than dinosaurs. If fate had not intervened, they might have been the rulers of the Mesozoic. Amid this constant tension, smaller lives thrived in the shadows. Tiny synapsids, the ancestors of mammals, dug burrows and emerged at night to feed on insects. They carried traits we recognize today: differentiated teeth, possible whiskers, even the first hints of fur. Their metabolisms were faster than most reptiles, their bodies warmer, their survival tied not to brute strength, but to adaptability. Though they were insignificant compared to armored reptiles or early dinosaurs, their persistence mattered. They were rehearsing for a future in which warm-blooded life would rise. The insect chorus defined the Triassic soundscape. Beetles chewed through decaying wood, recycling nutrients into soil. Dragonflies patrolled rivers with wingspans wider than a hand. Primitive flies buzzed above ferns, while spiders spun delicate webs among cycads. Ants and bees had not yet evolved, but insects were already essential, feeding reptiles, amphibians, and mammal-like creatures. Without them, the fragile ecosystems of the Triassic would have collapsed. Even the giants depended indirectly on insects. Every plateosaurus grazing on conifers relied on soils enriched by beetles and millipedes breaking down plant matter. The amphibians that remained were echoes of an earlier world. Giant temnospondyls, relatives of salamanders, lurked in rivers, some reaching lengths of 5 meters. With wide jaws and squat bodies, they waited to ambush fish or small reptiles. Smaller frog-like amphibians croaked in wetlands, their life cycles tied to seasonal rains. But their dominance was gone. In the arid interiors of Pangaea, amphibians could not compete with reptiles. Moist skin and water-bound reproduction limited them, and so they clung only to rivers and lakes, their calls fading as reptiles claimed the land. The seas of the Triassic told a different story, one of resurgence and innovation. After mass extinction, oceans had been nearly silent, their ecosystems collapsed. Yet in time, they roared back to life. Ammonites floated in vast swarms, their coiled shells dazzling in sunlight. Belemnites darted like arrows, propelled by jets of water. Sharks and bony fish diversified, flashing silver as they swam. Coral reefs began to rebuild, fragile but persistent, offering shelter to countless species. And then came the marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, at first clumsy swimmers, evolved into streamlined hunters, their bodies shaped like dolphins, their eyes massive for vision in deep water. Some were small, others rivaled modern whales. Fossilized stomach contents reveal their diets: fish bones, squid beaks, even other reptiles. Nothosaurs patrolled coastal shallows with serpentine necks, snapping at prey with precision. Placodonts crushed shellfish with broad, blunt teeth, resembling armored sea cows grazing on reefs. Each lineage was a new experiment, filling roles left empty by extinction. Imagine standing on a Triassic shoreline. The sea glimmers beneath harsh sunlight. Suddenly, an ichthyosaur breaches, arcing its long body before splashing down. Nearby, nothosaurs raise their heads from the waves, weaving their necks like serpents. Beneath the surface, ammonites spin and dart as predators close in. Sharks slice through schools of fish, while rays skim sandy bottoms. The oceans, once gutted, now teem with teeth, speed, and invention. The Triassic was also the dawn of flight. The earliest pterosaurs were fragile, their wingspans modest, their bones hollow and light. Yet their arrival transformed ecosystems. They skimmed rivers for fish, hunted insects in the air, and opened niches no reptile had claimed before. Though they were small and vulnerable, their wings carried the promise of the future, an empire of the skies that would last millions of years. The atmosphere itself shaped every life. Oxygen levels were lower than today, forcing creatures to adapt. Dinosaurs with efficient lungs and upright limbs could move farther, faster, and longer than rivals. Mammal-like synapsids, with warm metabolisms, could forage at night or endure temperature swings. Cold-blooded reptiles basked in sun to warm themselves but slowed when night fell. In a world of extremes, physiology was destiny, and destiny was forged not only in giants, but in small survivors. The Triassic was a proving ground. Every adaptation, armored scales, upright posture, fur, feathers, wings, was tested against drought, flood, fire, and ash. Most failed. Some endured. Those that endured wrote the story of the Mesozoic. The Triassic reminds us that the future is often hidden in shadows. The creatures that seemed dominant, giant amphibians, armored crocodile kin, would falter. The overlooked small dinosaurs, mammal ancestors, fragile pterosaurs, would rise. From silence after catastrophe, life reshaped itself into something new. And though it was quieter than the thunder of later ages, the Triassic carried within it the whispers of empires yet to come. To fully understand the Triassic, we must see it as a bridge, an age suspended between two catastrophes. It began in silence, after the greatest extinction in Earth's history, and it ended in fire, with yet another upheaval that reshaped life forever. In between, for nearly 50 million years, the planet experimented restlessly, filling empty spaces with strange prototypes, fragile survivors, and the early outlines of dynasties that would dominate the Mesozoic. The climate was one of the greatest forces shaping this era. Pangaea's size meant vast extremes. In the interiors, far from the ocean, summers blistered with unrelenting heat, while winters froze with equal severity. Rainfall was erratic. Sometimes entire seasons passed in drought, followed by sudden violent monsoons. Rivers flooded their banks, then vanished into dust. Volcanoes along the seams of Pangaea poured ash and gases into the sky, raising carbon dioxide and driving climate instability. The land was never static. Animals had to migrate, adapt, or perish. These harsh conditions left their mark on every creature. Amphibians, once the rulers of swampy worlds, dwindled. Their reliance on water for reproduction tied them to shrinking rivers and lakes. Giant temnospondyls survived in shadows, but they no longer dominated. Instead, reptiles flourished. Their scales resisted drying out. Their eggs could hatch away from water, and their metabolisms endured drought. The rise of reptiles was not sudden. It was steady, inevitable, written into their very biology. Among reptiles, diversity exploded. Some became armored like tanks, with bony plates running from head to tail. Others grew tusks or elaborate head crests, strange adornments whose functions remain partly mysterious. Some developed upright limbs, shifting from sprawling lizard-like gaits to efficient strides. This simple innovation changed everything. Lungs were no longer compressed with each step, meaning they could breathe while running. Suddenly, endurance was possible. Long-distance travel, migration across deserts, and persistent pursuit of prey became achievable. These were traits that dinosaurs refined to perfection. But in the early Triassic, dinosaurs were still small and secondary. Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, and Coelophysis were lightly built, agile, and efficient hunters, but they were overshadowed by the astonishing variety of crocodile relatives. Crurotaurs ruled rivers, forests, and plains, their forms ranging from armored herbivores to sleek predators. Some even galloped like horses, balancing on two legs. For much of the Triassic, it seemed their dynasty would eclipse the fragile beginnings of the dinosaurs. The forests revealed this tension vividly. Herds of Plateosaurus browsed on conifer needles, their long necks stretching into canopies. Armored etosaurs rooted along the forest floor. Crocodile kin lurked in undergrowth, ready to strike, while packs of Coelophysis darted in pursuit of smaller prey. Mammal-like synapsids scurried underfoot, foraging among ferns. Insects buzzed in clouds, pollinating cycads and feeding everything from lizards to amphibians. Each level of the forest, from towering conifers to leaf litter, supported a network of life. And yet, the system always teetered, vulnerable to drought, fire, or volcanic disruption. The deserts of the interior were harsher still. Red sands burned beneath the sun, plants grew only in scattered oases, and waterholes drew every creature into uneasy truce. Here, evolution was merciless. Only the fastest, toughest, or most resilient survived. Herbivores developed massive guts to digest fibrous plants. Carnivores evolved long legs for sprinting hunts. Small reptiles hid in burrows, emerging only when the heat relented. Fossils show trackways of herds migrating across arid plains, their journeys dictated not by predators, but by the desperate search for water. Above, the skies carried new voices. The earliest pterosaurs flapped clumsily at first, but their wings carried them into a dimension no other vertebrate had mastered. They skimmed rivers for fish, glided over deserts in search of insects, and nested along cliffs. Their fragile bones rarely fossilized, but when they did, they revealed pioneers, creatures that opened the aerial theater long before birds existed. Though small, their presence hinted at a future where the skies would roar with giant flyers. The oceans, too, staged their recovery. Coral reefs, though patchy, returned. Ammonites spiraled in vast numbers, drifting like living ornaments across seas. Belemnites jetted with bursts of speed. Sharks and bony fish filled the waves with silver flashes, and towering over them all were the marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, dolphin-like yet reptilian, became swift predators, some reaching the size of whales. Nothosaurs with flexible necks hunted in coastal shallows. Placodonts with crushing jaws grazed on shellfish. Fossilized stomachs preserved their last meals, painting vivid pictures of life beneath the surface. The seas were alive again, rebuilt from silence into roaring abundance. The physiology of creatures in this age was evolving in remarkable ways. Evidence from bone histology suggests that some early dinosaurs and synapsids grew rapidly, with continuous bone deposition, similar to warm-blooded animals. Hollow bones and possible air sacs in dinosaurs hint at advanced lungs. Fur in synapsids, feathers or filaments in some small dinosaurs, all point to a shift toward endothermy. In a world of cold nights, searing days, and low oxygen, being able to generate and regulate body heat gave immense advantages. It meant activity at dawn and dusk, endurance during migration, and resilience when climates swung unpredictably. The behavioral adaptations may have been just as important. Fossil bone beds of Chilophysis suggest pack behavior, dozens of individuals buried together in floods. This may point to coordinated hunting, or at least group living, strategies that gave small predators advantages against larger rivals. Evidence of nests and parental care appears even in some Triassic lineages, suggesting that dinosaurs and synapsids were beginning to invest in young. This shift, protecting and nurturing offspring, was another hallmark of warm-blooded life, and it foreshadowed the complex social behaviors of future ages. Despite all this resilience, the Triassic was not secure. Ecosystems remained fragile, and volcanic activity loomed as a constant threat. Toward the end of the period, massive eruptions associated with the breakup of Pangaea triggered another climatic crisis. Carbon dioxide spiked, temperatures swung, oceans acidified. Many of the dominant reptile groups, including much of the crocodile kin, collapsed. But dinosaurs, with their stamina, efficient lungs, and adaptability, survived. From that crucible of extinction, they emerged into the Jurassic, not as small survivors, but as the undisputed rulers of the land. The Triassic, then, was less an age of dominance and more an age of rehearsal. It was Earth's laboratory, testing ideas, discarding failures, and refining survivors. It gave us the first dinosaurs, the first pterosaurs, the first mammals, and the return of reptiles to the seas. It was quieter than the thunder of the Jurassic, stranger than the lush Cretaceous, but no less vital. Without the Triassic, there would be no age of dinosaurs, no age of mammals, no story of resilience written into the bones of life itself. The Triassic world must be seen as a stage constantly shifting beneath the feet of its inhabitants. While we often imagine geological time as slow and unchanging, in this era, the Earth itself seemed restless. Tectonic plates groaned as Pangaea began to fracture, laying the first rifts that would one day open into the Atlantic Ocean. Volcanic eruptions darkened skies with ash and poured rivers of lava across the land. Climate shifted back and forth between parched droughts and flooding rains. In such a world, life had to be endlessly flexible. Every species was a gamble, every adaptation a wager against extinction. The plants of the Triassic reveal this restless cycle. Conifers dominated, with tough needle-shaped leaves that resisted both heat and drought. Cycads, squat and palm-like, grew in clusters, their leathery fronds adapted to harsh conditions. Ginkgo trees, already ancient, spread their fan-shaped leaves across valleys. Horsetails grew tall along rivers, their segmented stems resilient to seasonal flooding. And ferns, humble yet persistent, spread in carpets wherever moisture lingered. Still, the landscapes lacked flowers, grasses, and fruit. It was a world of greens and browns, where survival mattered more than beauty. This vegetation shaped the herbivores that grazed upon it. Early sauropodomorphs, such as Plateosaurus, were among the first to exploit high vegetation, stretching their necks upward to strip conifer branches. These animals grew to lengths of 9 meters, their bodies heavy, yet surprisingly agile for their size. Armored etosaurs plodded through undergrowth, their snouts rooting in soil for roots and shoots, their bony plates protecting them from predators. Smaller herbivorous reptiles nibbled on ferns and cycads, leaving behind bite marks preserved in fossilized leaves. Even in these early days, ecosystems were forming intricate webs of interaction between plant and animal. Predators stalked these herbivores in relentless variety. Coelophysis, a slender dinosaur, hunted in groups, their fossilized remains sometimes found together in bone beds. Their sharp teeth and long tails made them swift killers, capable of taking down prey larger than themselves. Herrerasaurus, heavier and more robust, stretched to 3 meters, hunting with curved claws. But it was not only dinosaurs that prowled these forests. Crocodile relatives filled many niches. Some galloped like horses, others ambushed from rivers, still others browsed plants with armored bodies. For tens of millions of years, it was uncertain whether dinosaurs or crocodile kin would inherit the earth. The skies of the Triassic were beginning to open. The earliest pterosaurs appeared, delicate and small, their membranous wings stretched across elongated fingers. Fossil evidence reveals bones so thin they could shatter under pressure. Yet in life, these creatures were masters of gliding and flight. They skimmed rivers for fish, hunted insects in swarms, and perhaps nested on cliffs. Though fragile, they pioneered aerial ecosystems, adding a new dimension to the Triassic biosphere. Beneath the waters, the oceans were equally alive. Schools of ammonites swirled in elegant spirals, their shells dazzling in sunlit shallows. Belemnites darted through currents, propelled by jet-like bursts. Sharks reappeared in diverse forms, their teeth scattering across seafloors like endless reminders of their resilience. Coral reefs, though still rebuilding, formed havens for small fish, crabs, and mollusks. The return of reefs brought complexity back to the oceans, layering habitats in ways unseen since before the Great Dying. Yet the true rulers of the seas were the marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs had become sleek, dolphin-like hunters, their bodies streamlined for speed, their eyes enormous for deep-sea vision. They gave birth to live young in the water, an adaptation that freed them from the need to return to land. Nothosaurs, with serpentine necks, hunted in shallow lagoons, slipping between water and land with ease. Placodonts, broad-bodied and armored, fed on shellfish, their blunt teeth crushing clams and snails. Each lineage was unique, but together They transformed oceans from empty expanses into dynamic, predator-driven ecosystems. The soundscape of the Triassic was unlike anything we know today. Without birds, there were no songs in the forests. Without flowers, no meadows buzzed with bees. Instead, the dominant voices were the croaks of amphibians, the hisses of reptiles, the rustle of conifer needles in dry winds, and the constant hum of insects. Dragonflies skimmed rivers, with wings shimmering in sunlight. Beetles gnawed through wood, recycling nutrients into soil. Primitive flies swarmed above decaying plants, feeding spiders waiting in their webs. To walk through a Triassic forest was to hear a quieter, harsher symphony of survival. But life was not only about survival, it was also about innovation. Evidence suggests that some dinosaurs may already have been experimenting with filamentous coverings, primitive precursors to feathers. These structures could have helped with insulation in cool nights, or with display during mating rituals. In mammal-like synapsids, fur may have already been present, providing warmth and camouflage. Both traits foreshadowed the age of warm-blooded life, when generating and conserving body heat would be as important as speed or armor. The social behaviors of Triassic creatures hint at a changing world. Fossilized bone beds suggest herd living among early sauropodomorphs, offering safety in numbers. Pack behavior among predators like Coelophysis points to cooperation, a new evolutionary advantage. Burrow systems reveal communities of synapsids surviving harsh seasons underground. Even in this fragile age, life was becoming more complex, not just anatomically, but socially. Yet the Triassic never offered security. Toward its end, the Earth shuddered once more. The breakup of Pangaea unleashed volcanic activity on a scale unimaginable, known today as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province eruptions. Basalt floods spread across continents. Carbon dioxide spiked, driving rapid global warming. Oceans acidified, devastating marine ecosystems. Entire lineages of reptiles collapsed in the chaos. The crocodile kin, once dominant, were struck down. Ammonites suffered heavy losses. But dinosaurs, small, resilient, and adaptable, endured. When the fires cleared and the climate stabilized, they stood ready to inherit the Earth. The Triassic was thus a paradox. Fragile, yet foundational. Chaotic, yet creative. It was a time when ecosystems teetered constantly on collapse, yet the seeds of future empires were sown. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, mammals, and marine reptiles all began their stories here. Without the experiments of the Triassic, the Jurassic would never have thundered with giants, nor the Cretaceous with diversity, nor the Cenozoic with mammals and humans. To look back at the Triassic is to see resilience at its rawest. It was not an age of dominance, but of survival. And in survival, the future was forged. The Triassic was not only a story of survival and innovation, it was a crucible in which the rules of life were rewritten. After the devastation of the Permian extinction, Earth's ecosystems resembled an empty stage. By the time the Triassic drew to its close, that stage had been filled once more with actors that would define the next 150 million years. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, mammals, and marine reptiles were not yet dominant in numbers or size, but they were present, rehearsing for their roles in the great drama of prehistory. The landscape itself shaped this transformation. Pangaea stretched from pole to pole, a single colossal continent. Its coasts were humid, lined with forests of conifers and cycads, nourished by seasonal rains. Its interior, by contrast, was a desert wasteland of blistering heat and freezing nights, punctuated only by sparse oases. To survive here meant to adapt to extremes, long migrations, efficient water use, and endurance in the face of scarcity. Many species that thrived near coasts could not endure the heart of the supercontinent, forcing a constant sorting of winners and losers. In these contrasting worlds, dinosaurs quietly spread. Early forms like Chelophysis left trackways across floodplains, suggesting coordinated packs. Their bones reveal lightweight frames, sharp teeth, and long tails for balance, perfect for swift pursuit. Other small carnivores hunted alone, striking opportunistically at insects, lizards, or young herbivores. Herbivorous dinosaurs, though less common, began experimenting with size, some reaching lengths beyond 7 meters, hinting at the giants to come. They browsed on conifers and cycads, their broad stomachs fermenting tough vegetation. Though still overshadowed by crocodile kin, dinosaurs had begun to claim footholds across every environment. The crocodile relatives, meanwhile, remained astonishingly diverse. Some species evolved into heavily armored herbivores, their bodies covered in thick plates. Others became semi-aquatic ambush predators, lurking in rivers to snatch prey. Still others sprinted on 2 legs, their jaws lined with serrated teeth. They filled roles we might associate with dinosaurs: herbivores, predators, even pack hunters. For much of the Triassic, it seemed that this lineage would dominate. Fossil records show their footprints scattered across plains, swamps, and deltas, proof of their near ubiquity. But nature is not always predictable. Their dominance was real, but temporary. The synapsids, small and furtive, were the survivors we would least expect. Once rulers of the Permian, they had been nearly erased by extinction. Yet in the Triassic they endured, though diminished. Most were no larger than rodents, emerging at night to forage on insects. Their bones suggest faster metabolisms and possible fur, adaptations that allowed them to regulate heat in a world of extremes. They dug burrows, avoided predators, and relied on stealth rather than strength. Though inconspicuous, they carried the seeds of future mammals: differentiated teeth, warm blood, parental care. While overshadowed by reptiles, their persistence was the quiet triumph of the Triassic. The oceans mirrored this pattern of experimentation. Coral reefs, fragile but returning, supported new species of fish, crabs, and mollusks. Ammonites and belemnites flourished, filling niches once empty. Sharks diversified, leaving behind countless teeth as fossils. But it was the marine reptiles who claimed dominance. Ichthyosaurs evolved into masters of the seas, their bodies streamlined, their eyes enormous, their flippers powerful. Some species reached sizes comparable to modern whales. They hunted fish and squid, diving deep into oceans, their skeletons preserving even unborn young inside mothers' bellies, a rare glimpse into their reproduction. Nothosaurs slithered through shallow lagoons, their long necks weaving as they snapped at prey. Placodonts, armored and blunt-toothed, grazed on shellfish along reefs. Later, plesiosaurs began to emerge, testing long-necked designs that would dominate future seas. Each lineage was a fresh experiment, filling the oceans with new possibilities. After silence, the seas had become theaters of innovation once more. The skies offered their own revolution. The earliest pterosaurs, delicate and small, pioneered powered flight. Their wings, stretched skin over elongated fingers, made them clumsy on land, but graceful in air. They hunted fish, insects, and perhaps scavenged. Fossils preserve their hollow bones and fragile skeletons, reminders of their evolutionary gamble. Though vulnerable, they had opened a new frontier. For the first time, vertebrates could truly claim the air. Their legacy would shape the entire Mesozoic. The climate, unstable and harsh, tested every adaptation. Oxygen levels were lower than today, demanding efficient lungs and stamina. Dinosaurs, with their possible air sacs, thrived where others faltered. Warm-blooded synapsids endured nights and cold snaps. Cold-blooded reptiles basked in heat, but slowed in chill. Volcanic eruptions injected chaos into these systems, altering temperatures, poisoning skies, and triggering extinctions. Evolution was relentless. Lineages rose, flourished briefly, then collapsed. Only those with flexibility, physiological, behavioral, or ecological, endured. Toward the end of the Triassic, the stage shifted violently once more. Pangaea began to rift apart. The Central Atlantic magmatic province erupted with unimaginable force, spewing lava across vast regions. Carbon dioxide surged, driving global warming. Oceans acidified, devastating marine life. Entire lineages of crocodile kin collapsed. Ammonites suffered heavily. Amphibians dwindled further. But dinosaurs, with their stamina and adaptability, endured. They emerged from the chaos stronger than before, poised to dominate the Jurassic with a suddenness that seems almost inevitable in hindsight. The Triassic, therefore, was not just an age of recovery. It was a proving ground, a rehearsal for the great ages of the Mesozoic. Its forests were quieter, its deserts harsher, its seas stranger than later times. But within it lay the beginnings of nearly every major lineage that would shape Earth's story. Dinosaurs, mammals, pterosaurs, and marine reptiles. Without the Triassic, there would be no thunder of sauropods, no soaring pterodactyls, no mammalian rise, no humanity. The lesson of the Triassic is clear. Resilience matters more than power. The dominant crocodile kin fell. The overlooked dinosaurs rose. The tiny synapsids endured. Evolution is not always about strength. It is about endurance, adaptability, and the ability to survive upheaval. In this fragile age, those qualities mattered most. And in their quiet persistence, the seeds of future empires were planted. The Triassic Age was not simply a quiet interlude between disasters. It was a world of tension, drama, and restless invention. Every environment told a different story of survival. On the coasts, life flourished where seasonal rains supported forests and wetlands. Inland, deserts tested endurance with scorching heat and freezing nights. In rivers, amphibians lingered in the shadows of their decline. In the skies, fragile pioneers flapped uncertainly, while in the seas, reptilian hunters carved a new hierarchy of predators. Walking along a Triassic coastline, you might encounter forests of conifers rising like pillars, cycads clustering with fronds spread wide, and ginkgo-like trees swaying in seasonal breezes. Ferns and horsetails filled every damp hollow. Beneath this green canopy, herds of Plateosaurus grazed slowly, their heavy bodies pushing through undergrowth. Their footprints sank deep into the mud, leaving trails that fossilized into silent records of migration. Insects hummed above the ferns, while small reptiles darted among the roots. And from the trees, the sudden rustle of a predator, Coelophysis, slender and swift, eyes fixed on vulnerable young. Inland, the picture changed. The deserts of Pangaea's interior were vast and unforgiving. Red dunes stretched beyond the horizon. Wind carved ridges into sandstone cliffs. Plants grew only near rare springs, forming fragile oases. Here, herds of herbivores gathered at shrinking waterholes, predators stalking them relentlessly. Fossil trackways reveal tense gatherings, multiple species converging at muddy pools, their prints overlapping in chaotic mosaics. One misstep, one moment of weakness, could mean death. Migration was constant, driven not by choice, but necessity. Life in the Triassic desert was a gamble with the sun. The rivers and lakes that crossed these landscapes were lifelines. Amphibians clung to them desperately. Temnospondyls, giants of the waterways, lurked beneath the surface, their wide jaws snapping at fish or unwary reptiles. Their massive skulls, lined with teeth, reveal a world where ambush was survival. Smaller amphibians croaked from muddy banks, their calls echoing against forest edges. Yet these were echoes of a fading empire. As climates shifted and droughts deepened, amphibians dwindled, giving way to reptiles, whose independence from water granted them dominance. The crocodile relatives, or cruorotars, embodied this dominance in startling variety. Some resembled modern crocodiles, lying in wait beneath murky waters. Others became swift land hunters, galloping across plains on long legs. Still others armored themselves into nearly impregnable fortresses, browsing on tough plants. Their fossils reveal a dazzling array of body plans, proof that this lineage was evolution's favored experiment in the Triassic. For millions of years, they seemed unshakable. They held the ecological roles dinosaurs would later claim: apex predators, armored grazers, opportunistic hunters. Their reign was powerful, but ultimately, it was not eternal. Dinosaurs in this age were still shadows of their future selves, but their presence was unmistakable. Small, agile, lightly built, they moved with endurance across floodplains and forests. Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, and Coelophysis were only the beginning, species that revealed the core traits of the lineage: upright stance, efficient breathing, rapid growth. These features made them more resilient than their rivals, even if they were not yet the giants of later ages. Fossil trackways suggest group movement, hinting at early cooperation. Some nests and egg fossils point to parental care, a sign of behavioral sophistication. Quietly, almost invisibly, dinosaurs were preparing for their future. The oceans were theaters of astonishing revival. Ammonites drifted in coiled shells, their patterns as varied as fingerprints. Belemnites propelled themselves with jet bursts, their straight shells leaving behind bullet-like fossils. Sharks, ever survivors, diversified again, scattering their teeth across sea floors. Coral reefs, patchy but persistent, created sanctuaries for smaller life. And swimming through it all were the marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs sliced through currents with dolphin-like grace, their eyes larger than a dinner plate to pierce the dim light of deep seas. Fossils preserve even their embryos, proof that they gave birth in the water. Nothosaurs lurked in shallow lagoons, necks weaving like serpents. Placodonts grazed reefs with crushing jaws, their armored backs glinting in the sunlit shallows. Each was a bold invention, a solution to the problem of reclaiming empty seas. Above these worlds, the skies shimmered with fragile pioneers. Pterosaurs, small and delicate, glided on membranous wings. Their hollow bones made them fragile, yet also gave them flight. They hunted insects and skimmed waters, adding a new dimension to ecosystems. No vertebrate had flown before them, and their appearance changed the rules of survival. Fossils suggest they nested in colonies. Their wings folded as they crawled awkwardly on land, but in the air they were unmatched. Their descendants would one day fill skies with creatures of unimaginable size, but here in the Triassic, they were experiments, fragile yet revolutionary. The climate itself shaped every adaptation. Oxygen levels were lower, forcing animals to evolve efficient lungs or fast metabolisms. Dinosaurs may have developed bird-like air sacs, allowing continuous breathing during activity. Synapsids, with possible fur, retained body heat and foraged at night. Reptiles basked in sun, but slowed in cold, vulnerable when temperatures dropped suddenly. Volcanic eruptions pumped gases into the atmosphere, altering temperatures and rainfall. Entire ecosystems collapsed and rebounded in cycles. Evolution, in this age, was not slow. It was frantic, a race against instability. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Triassic was its innovation under pressure. Armor, speed, endurance, parental care, fur, feathers, wings. These traits either appeared or were refined in this era. Most experiments failed. Some vanished into extinction without descendants. But others endured, and those survivors would shape every chapter of Earth's story that followed. The Triassic was not yet thunderous with giant sauropods or fierce tyrannosaurs. It was not lush with flowering meadows or buzzing with bees. Instead, it was raw, quiet, and precarious. But beneath that quiet, the foundations of future empires were being laid, line by line, adaptation by adaptation. To journey deeper into the Triassic is to step into a laboratory of nature, where every shape, sound, and strategy was tested under unforgiving conditions. This was not a polished world of stable ecosystems. It was an age of trial and error, of resilience against extremes, of fragile victories over chaos. The vegetation of this era tells much of the story. Conifers stretched skyward, their needle-shaped leaves conserving water in arid climates. Cycads stood in clusters, squat and palm-like, their leathery fronds absorbing harsh sunlight. Ginkgo-like trees spread their strange fan-shaped leaves across valleys, their lineage destined to outlive empires. Horsetails, with their segmented stems, rose along rivers, while carpets of ferns colonized moist soil. No flowers bloomed, no grasses waved in fields. Instead, the palette of the Triassic was a muted green and brown, a survivalist's landscape, austere but determined. Herbivores adapted to these plants with ingenuity. Early sauropodomorphs like Plateosaurus stretched their long necks into canopies, grazing where smaller animals could not reach. Their heavy bodies, sometimes 9 meters in length, carried immense digestive chambers for fermenting tough conifer leaves. Etosaurs plodded through undergrowth, armored like walking fortresses, their pig-like snouts rooting for low vegetation. Smaller reptiles nibbled ferns, leaving tiny bite marks preserved in fossilized fronds. Each herbivore was a specialist, tuned to extract every ounce of energy from the sparse greenery. Predators followed closely. Packs of Chelephysis, slender and efficient, darted across floodplains, long tails balancing their every movement. Their sharp teeth and hooked claws made them deadly in groups, capable of overwhelming prey larger than themselves. Larger hunters like Herrerasaurus prowled alone, slicing through bone and flesh with curved claws. Yet dinosaurs did not have the monopoly on predation. Cruorotars, crocodile relatives, matched them in ferocity and variety. Some ambushed from rivers, their jaws snapping shut with bone-crushing force. Others galloped across land, their long legs carrying them at surprising speeds. Still others wore armor, turning their backs into living shields. For much of the Triassic, it was these crocodile kin, not dinosaurs, who held the spotlight as the apex hunters of the land. The deserts of Pangaea amplified this contest. Red sands stretched beneath an unrelenting sun, their heat shimmering across the horizon. Plants grew only at scattered oases, fragile green dots in oceans of dust. Waterholes became centers of drama. Herds of herbivores trudged in from vast distances, predators lying in ambush at their edges. Fossil trackways record the chaos. Multiple species pressed together, their prints overlapping, the ground churned into mud by desperate feet. When droughts came, corpses lined the dry beds of rivers, silent reminders of a climate that gave nothing freely. Survival here was not about strength. It was about endurance and timing. In the rivers and wetlands, echoes of the past lingered. Amphibians, once rulers of the swamps, clung to life. Temnospondyls, massive relatives of salamanders, waited in ambush beneath murky waters, their broad skulls and rows of teeth revealing their predatory strength. Smaller amphibians croaked from reeds, but their range was shrinking. They were relics of another age, slowly yielding to reptiles that could breed and thrive far from water. Their calls, echoing at dusk, were songs of resilience, but also of decline. Above these shifting landscapes, the skies carried pioneers. Early pterosaurs, delicate and small, skimmed rivers for fish or hunted insects in evening air. Their wings, skins stretched over elongated fingers, caught the wind in fragile arcs. On land, they shuffled clumsily, but in the air they were innovators, vertebrates mastering a new dimension of life. Colonies may have gathered on cliffs, their young huddled in nests, wings folded tightly until strong enough for flight. They were vulnerable, yes, but they opened a future where the skies themselves would become battlefields of survival. Meanwhile, the oceans pulsed with invention. The ichthyosaurs had evolved into streamlined hunters, their bodies shaped like dolphins, their flippers powerful, their eyes enormous for deep-water vision. Some species birthed live young in open waters, a remarkable step in marine adaptation. Nothosaurs glided in shallow seas, serpentine necks weaving as they struck at prey. Placodonts grazed reefs, crushing shellfish with broad, blunt teeth, their armored backs reflecting sunlight. Around them swirled schools of ammonites, their coiled shells glittering, while belemnites jetted through currents like living arrows. Sharks, resilient as always, darted through shoals of bony fish, scattering silver clouds across reefs. The sounds of the Triassic world were eerie compared to ours. No birdsong echoed in forests, no bees buzzed in meadows. Instead, the air carried the dry rustle of conifer needles, the croak of amphibians, the hiss of reptiles slipping through undergrowth, and the relentless hum of insects. A dragonfly's wings thrummed over rivers, a beetle's mandibles cracked wood, a spider's web trembled in the breeze. The night was quieter still, broken only by the scurry of synapsids leaving their burrows and the occasional splash of predators in dark waters. It was a world tuned to a harsher, slower rhythm. The synapsids were the overlooked survivors, yet perhaps the most important of all. Small, rodent-sized, they emerged at night to forage for insects. Their bones reveal fast growth, higher metabolisms, and possible fur, signs of warm-blooded life. They dug burrows, avoided predators, and cared for their young. In the shadows of giants, they survived by stealth and adaptability. While the etosaurs plodded and the crocodile kin roared, synapsids endured quietly, writing the opening chapter of the mammalian story. Their insignificance in the Triassic belies their ultimate destiny, to inherit the Earth long after the age of reptiles ended. The climate, unstable and unforgiving, drove all of these adaptations. Oxygen levels were lower, pushing lungs and metabolisms to evolve. Dinosaurs and pterosaurs developed efficient breathing systems, perhaps with bird-like air sacs. Synapsids insulated themselves with fur. Crocodile kin armored their bodies or sprinted with long limbs. Every innovation was tested against drought, flood, heat, and volcanic ash. Entire lineages thrived for a few million years, only to vanish suddenly when the climate shifted. Evolution in the Triassic was not a slow, steady climb. It was a relentless gauntlet of extinction and survival. What makes the Triassic so remarkable is how much of the future it foreshadowed. Warm-blooded metabolisms, feathers, fur, wings, herding, parental care, all appeared in seed form during this time. They were not yet perfected, but they were present, waiting for the stability of later ages to flourish. It was here, in the silence after catastrophe, that Earth rehearsed for the ages to come. The Triassic was an age of resilience, an age of fragile beginnings that rose from the silence of devastation. In its forests of conifers and cycads, we saw the first steps of giants like Plateosaurus. In its deserts, we watched survival pared down to endurance and timing. In its rivers, amphibians croaked their fading songs while crocodile kin prowled as the dominant predators of the land. In its skies, fragile pterosaurs opened a new frontier, and in its seas, ichthyosaurs, nothosaurs, and placodonts turned emptiness into abundance once again. It was not yet the world of thunderous herds of sauropods or the reign of titanic predators. It was quieter, harsher, rawer, a laboratory of evolution where survival was a gamble and every adaptation a test. But within that laboratory, the seeds of the future were planted. Dinosaurs honed the traits that would carry them through the next 150 million years. Mammals, small and hidden, carried warmth and fur into the night. Pterosaurs spread their fragile wings and claimed the skies. Marine reptiles reshaped the oceans into theaters of power and grace. The end of the Triassic came with fire and chaos. Volcanic eruptions split Pangaea, spewing lava across continents and filling the skies with ash. Climate shifted once more. Oceans acidified. Lineages collapsed. The crocodile kin, once so dominant, were broken. Amphibians dwindled further, but dinosaurs endured. When the ash settled and the climate calmed, they stood ready to inherit the Earth. The lesson of the Triassic is simple, yet profound. True power lies not in domination, but in endurance. The overlooked survivors became the architects of the future. The small, the fragile, the seemingly insignificant carried within them the potential to shape entire ages. The Triassic was not the age of dinosaurs. It was the dawn of their empire. Thank you for joining us on this journey back through time. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and rebirth, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Journey Through Time, where history's greatest stories, on land, in sea, and in sky, come alive once more. Until next time, keep exploring the echoes of the past.